In its nearly 30 years of existing, the Pokemon franchise has given us so many games. Over 20 installments of Pokemon games, and that's just including the mainline games. Of course, there's so many other outlets to enjoy the franchise. But what if I told you that one of the biggest, most ambitious Pokemon games, one that would have surely been a hit amongst fans and been arguably the most important Pokemon game for the lore of the Pokemon universe, never actually existed because it was planned, but then never got made? Welcome back to the post where we talk about all things Pokemon, and today we'll be talking about Pokemon Z, a game that was indeed planned by the Pokemon Company, but was ultimately scrapped. We'll be talking about what this game was, what it could have entailed, as well as why it was scrapped, why it's so important to fans, and how it actually does kind of live on. So this game was Pokemon Z, and now many of you will know exactly what I'm talking about, and you'll know the details on it because it is such a huge topic in the community and a huge what if to the community. But yeah, Pokemon Z, it was originally going to be a thing. So every single game in the Pokemon franchise has gotten some kind of secondary version, a third version, an expanded version, or in the case of Black and White, sequels, or in the case of the latest games on the Nintendo Switch, DLC. But we see this all the time, right? Ruby and Sapphire get Emerald, Black and White get Black 2 and White 2, Sun and Moon get Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Yet, there's one game that never got this treatment, Pokemon X and Y. We see Pokemon X and Y release in 2013, then in 2014, we get the release of Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and then 2015, radio silence. Nothing's happening in Pokemon. No DLC for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, no DLC for X and Y, and certainly no Pokemon game. Then with 2016, we've moved on. Kalos is a thing of the past. We're looking at Pokemon Sun and Moon. And it was with the release of Pokemon Sun and Moon that we learned a little bit about what Pokemon's original plans were for 2015. We can see in the data for Pokemon Sun and Moon, there's a list of past Pokemon games, right? You're seeing that there's Pokemon X and Y. Right under that is listed Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. And then right under that is listed Pokemon X2 and Pokemon Y2. Honestly, while fans were kind of freaking out about this, I don't think anyone was too surprised about this. The gap year in 2015 was a little suspicious, though it had happened before. In between Pokemon Black and White and Black and White 2, there were a gap year there as well. So it wasn't too surprising, but then seeing X2 and Y2, it just made sense to us all. I mean, you have the fact that there are so many mysteries left unsolved from Pokemon X and Y. You have the fact that we never really got focus on Zygarde outside of the anime, which introduces all these new forms of Zygarde. So, like, there's clearly, like, okay, there was something for Zygarde, and it just didn't work out. But seeing X2 and Y2 was kind of confirmation that, okay, so that was the plan. Now, this was all in 2016. Fast forward to almost 10 years later, 8 years to be exact, we get this big event that happens called the Terra Leak, where basically these people hacked GameFreak and stole a terabyte's worth of information from GameFreak. I've covered this leak relatively extensively if you want to check out all the many videos I've done on that. But yeah, this Terra Leak came with so much information on the Pokemon games, including future projects and including a lot of cut content from the past and the Pokemon franchise, like all the way to like Generation 3. And in this Terra Leak, we do see information on Pokemon X2 and Y2. Not a ton, but enough to know that Game Freak was seriously working on this game at one point. And interestingly enough, we also see references to a Pokemon Z. Now, obviously, Pokemon X2 and Y2 and Pokemon Z were not going to get made. So what happened here is very likely that Pokemon started working on an X2 and Y2 and ended up deciding to just go, okay, let's just make this into Pokemon Z. Or the vice versa of that, and Pokemon was working on a Pokemon Z, and then ultimately decided, okay, why don't we turn this into a Pokemon X2 and a Pokemon Y2? Really, though, it doesn't matter which one was first and which one came last, because neither of them happened. But the existence of that name X2 and Y2 does imply that Pokemon Z was going to be a sequel. It was going to take place after the events of Pokemon X and Y, which makes a ton of sense. You know, the generation prior, you had Black and White get those sequel games, like, instead of the third versions that you had been seeing before, so it makes sense that Game Freak would have wanted to continue this pattern. We also got some details as to what could be featured in this Pokemon Z game. First off, there are references to a Mega Charizard Z. We don't see any designs, but we can see that it exists in coding, so very likely Charizard would have gotten a third Mega Evolution, and since Charizard is getting another Mega Evolution here, it likely would have introduced a whole new batch of Mega Evolutions, similar to how with X and Y, we obviously got new Mega Evolution since it introduced Mega Evolution into the franchise, but then right after that in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, we got more Mega Evolution. So yeah, it makes sense that if there was another game in the 6th generation of Pokemon, it too would have brought in more Mega Evolutions. And yes, Charizard would have been one of them. Let's let that sink in. Everyone was so mad that Charizard had 2 Mega Evolutions and Blastoise and Venusaur only got 1. Well, joke's on you, because Charizard was actually going to have 3. As well as this, we also get to learn something very, very interesting about Pokemon X and Y, and that is that you could explore a whole new region in it to the south of Kalos. That's right, South Kalos is real. There is a whole map for the South Kalos area, complete with routes and cities/towns, and also dungeons. Different dungeons were scattered around here. In this South Kalos map, we do see that there is the existence of a battle island, which very likely would have been a post-game battle experience, probably similar to the battle resort in Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. But since the battle Mason is taking place in Kalude City in the Kalos region, Battle Island could have housed more. Maybe that whole, Battle Frontier project that we got teased in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire could have come up in this Battle Island, the Kalos region. That is purely speculation and probably not even what would have happened, because Game Freak seemed to suggest that they don't even think the Battle Frontier would work anymore. But, I can dream. As well as the Battle Island, there was also another island called the Mirage Island. Now, you'll remember that this is a feature in the Hoenn region. This is also prominently featured in Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Mirage Islands are throughout the area, and while it's never explicitly stated, it's pretty obvious that these things are being tied to Hoopa in this game. So the existence of a Mirage Island in the Kalos region, to me, suggests that we very likely could have had a post-game story that revolved around Hoopa, or at least ultimately gave us a Hoopa, similar to how Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were the first games to have a post-game plot that was not from a mystery gift, that involved a mythical and allowed you to get access to a mythical Pokemon without doing some kind of mystery gift or connecting it to another game or anything like that. Just in your game and your game alone, you got access to a mythical. It looks like Kalos might have done the same thing here by giving us access to Hoopa with some kind of Mirage Island focused plot. Ultimately, we can never be too sure of why Pokemon Z never happened though, because, well, frankly, Game Freak didn't even intend for us to know that it was a thing they were working on, so of course we don't know why it was scrapped. However, we can kind of, just looking at the Pokemon franchise, make some guesses as to why this game was scrapped. Pokemon was still relatively new to the 3DS, so there's likely a learning curve there when you're learning a new console, right? Especially because not only were they on a new console, but they were transitioning their games to be 3D games, whereas in the past they had been 2D games. So it makes sense that there would be a learning curve here. And then you combine that with the fact that if this game was planned to release in 2015, which seems likely given that that's where the gap year is for this time period, right after that, in 2016, they released Pokemon Sun and Moon. Now, Pokemon Sun and Moon were huge games. Not only were these a brand new generation for the franchise, which, includes a lot of work that you have to put in, right? There's going to be new features. There's going to be a huge batch of new Pokemon or forms, and then also there's going to be new characters you have to develop, new story, like a brand new story revolving around a new legendary and a new region you have to build. All of these things are going to take a lot of time, so you can kind of assume that Pokemon Z was scrapped so that Game Freak could focus their full attention on Pokemon Sun and Moon and really develop that games and make sure they were special, because again, a new generation takes more work. It also, in the end, always outsells remakes or third versions or sequel games new generations are always going to do better, so it makes sense to prioritize that from a financial standpoint. And then also, not only was Sun and Moon a brand new generation, but it was also the game being released for Pokemon's 20th anniversary, which I don't know if you guys remember that, but that was an insane year. So much was going on in the 20th anniversary. They were building the hype like so much for Pokemon. Pokemon was everywhere. They were releasing mythical Pokemon every month. They released Pokemon Go, which obviously became a huge phenomenon. And they were just doing Pokemon things so often. Pokemon was everywhere. You couldn't avoid Pokemon that year. So it makes sense that, yes, we want to focus on our project for that year, which unfortunately means we need to take this thing we've been developing and we need to shelve it. And honestly, at the end of the day, it looks like this plan was successful. Pokemon Sun and Moon were very successful games and also are widely regarded as amazing games. Of course, everyone has their opinions, and while a Kalos fan like me is upset that Pokemon Z never happened, I can admit Pokemon Sun and Moon are amazing games, and Generation 7 is beloved amongst the fans. And that's definitely due to GameFreak's work that they put into this game. It introduced so many new features that people loved, like a new category of Pokemon called Ultra Beasts. It introduced regional variants, which is like a fan favorite thing now that has stood the test of time and is still around today, albeit much less. But yeah, these were huge games. They were very successful, and that probably is because Game Freak decided to focus on it. But like I said at the beginning of this video, Pokemon Z is a name that fans have spoken for many, many years. It's a topic that has always come up. You often will see it trending on Twitter or something, videos on Pokemon Z and what it could have looked like, and just Kalos in general do really well because Game Freak left it such a mystery. So obviously fans do still care about this game. And I think for good reason, a good number of reasons, in fact. I mean, for one, for Kalos fans, like I said myself, I mean, look, Kalos was done kind of dirty, right? Like, it was not considered a great game, but people who love Kalos know what it could have been, and Pokemon Z would have shown all the Kalos haters what it could have been, but it never happened. And then also, too, if you just love Kalos, you obviously want more Kalos. I got to see Sinnoh twice with Diamond and Pearl and Platinum. Heck, now I've seen it 4 times with Legends Arceus and Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl added to that. Why have I only seen Kalos once? Then you also have the fact that Mega Evolution is a beloved gimmick amongst the fans. While there are some people that don't like the competitive side of it, ultimately the gimmick is, you have to admit, widely regarded as a successful gimmick. And yeah, this would have very likely introduced more Mega Evolutions to that roster, so of course people would have wanted to see that. Then there's the fact that just the Kalos region itself is so rich with history and lore. I mean, not only is this the first Pokemon gimmick that they give us all this lore and history for, but then also the Kalos region even talks about a great war that happened that ultimately ended with Pokemon's version of a nuclear weapon. I mean, this was a huge game for Pokemon lore, like arguably the biggest. It's between this and the Generation 4 games for sure. So yes, a return to Kalos would have meant more of that crazy, rich, and frankly dark lore that a lot of people, like myself, really do enjoy hearing about. Then we have the anime. The anime seemed to tease stuff that could have been in a Pokemon Z game, but we never got, and were kind of just side features in Pokemon Sun and Moon. We saw all these different Zygarde forms in the anime. We saw Ash and his Greninja access a kind of new gimmick that seems to be like a mirror to Mega Evolution or some kind of alternative to Mega Evolution. And so there is, at least for me, the question of what if this would have been a feature in Pokemon Z, but was ultimately delegated to just this special Greninja you get from a demo and then ultimately scrapped altogether because it never got featured in the game. So it's kind of not even really like that canon, right? Those kinds of things wander in your mind as a what if. Like, this is just a huge what if for us. And then it becomes even more of a what if when Game Freak announces Pokemon Legends ZA. So now it's like, okay, we get this game, but I wonder how it differed from the original Pokemon Z that was supposed to exist. And on that note, it does seem that Pokemon Z lives on. It was resurrected, or I guess a better way to put it would be that it was reincarnated as Pokemon Legends ZA. This game was announced in Pokemon Day in 2024, and it is got a similar name to Pokemon Z. It's Pokemon Legends ZA you know, so similar naming scheme, and it is a game set in Kalos that takes place after the events of Pokemon X and Y, like Pokemon Z was going to. With all that said, I think that it's not crazy to assume that some of the planned story arcs for characters, or perhaps concepts, maybe even the new Mecha evolutions that were originally planned for Pokemon Z, might be carried over into Pokemon Legends ZA, and we'll see it live on here. Now, with that said, there will, of course, be a lot of differences, as, you know, this was a game planned for the 3DS, while this is a game planned for the Nintendo Switch. It also would have been more of a traditional Pokemon experience, whereas this is going to be a Legends game, so it'll be more in line with the experience you get in Pokemon Legends Arceus, at least with like the features and the gameplay mechanics. And then also, this story takes place entirely within Lumio City, whereas Pokemon Z would have featured all of Kalos and even the southern neighbor of it. So yeah, there's definitely going to be some differences, but I do think we will see some concepts from Pokemon Z appearing in Pokemon Legends ZA. The sucky thing is, though, we don't have Pokemon Z, so we'll never know. You know, everything from Pokemon Legends ZA, everything new, could be from ZA, or could be from the Scrap Z game, rather. But we won't know it, because we don't have the Z game to compare it to and say, oh yeah, that was from this. You know, so that is kind of sad, but let me know what you guys think. Do you like the idea of Pokemon Legends ZA? If Pokemon Z had to die to give us Pokemon Legends ZA, are you okay with that trade? Or would you have much rather gotten a Pokemon Z game on the 3DS way back in 2015? Let me know in the comments below. I don't know where I'm at with it, if I'm honest. I guess I'll have to play Pokemon Legends ZA to see. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, all that fun stuff. And until next time, I will see all of you later.